Okay, have you a long tape in your machine? How far do we take it? And how many speakers do we need? We know we have 2 ears. For God's sake, we don't have 128 ears to perceive sound. And the more speakers you have, the more expensive it's going to get. So I think there's a kind of limit to how far we're going to be able to push this. And we are so advanced in audio as opposed to pictures, and we have maybe we just have to take stock and let's get our pictures up to catch up a little bit before we start pushing any more audio systems on the general public and how much they can cope with. My name is André Jacquemin. I am a sound designer, sound supervisor. Anything that makes a noise, I end up probably doing or have done it. I've worked on feature films, music as well. So I've done a lot of projects over the years. Some of them have been quite well known, and you've probably heard of Monty Python's Life of Brian, Monty Python's Holy Grail, Terry Gilliam's The Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus, his last project, which was The Zero Theorem with Christoph Waltz and Matt Damon. My last project was Absolutely Anything. And in between all of that, I've been working with Monty Python for over 40 years. So quite a diverse amount of things that I have worked on. At school, I was playing in a band, and I wanted to record the band, but I didn't have enough money to actually book a recording studio to get the band recorded. So I thought, well, if I could get a job in a recording studio, I could have all the recording time I wanted. So I was walking by one day past a recording studio that had a sign in the window, and it said that a T-boy was wanted. And I thought, oh, that's good, a job opportunity. It's fate, I guess, that I happened to walk by, see the sign. So I wrote down the number on the place. I phoned them and said, could I come in for an interview for a job? And they said, yes, sure. So I thought, I was quite young, and I thought, well, I want to let them know that I am a genuine person, an honest person. What do I do? I said, I know. If I took my mother with me for the interview as well, she could then explain a bit more about what I am like. And actually that worked out really, really well. My mother is German, or was German, and she had a really quite a good way of actually sort of talking enthusiastically about things. So I had this interview with somebody called Bob Court, and Bob Court was quite famous in his own time. He was in a skiffle group in the 1950s, and he was also the studio manager there, and he was a very happy, jolly, looks like from the RAF with this big moustache, and a fantastic guy. And we did the interview, and he said, thank you very much. I would now like to have a chat with your mother. So I left the room, my mother came in. So then she left after the interview into another room. I came in, and then he said to me, he said, Andre, I like you. I think I would like to offer you the job. He said, but, he said, we've had 3 people in 6 months here, and I expect you probably won't end up working here for very long, because they all fell down on the job of what they were doing. So For one reason or another, they didn't cut the mustard. So, and that kind of got to me. I thought, well, what does he mean by that? And so I said, well, what was the reason for them not being here anymore? He said, well, you have a roster of duties to do when you work in a studio. Like, you have to go in to do the studio, tidy it up, clean the ashtrays, make sure there is water on the table. You have to make sure the studio is clean and tidy. And then you have to meet the clients when they come, show them into the studio. So I had this whole list of things to do. And I always remember Bob Court saying that I expect you to be no different from the other 3 people we had here. And I said, you know, I'll show him that I am different. And that gave me the incentive. And it's like everything, in the end, the job becomes more important than the band I was in. And I had a very good teacher called Alan Bailey, who was at Radio Luxembourg for 30 years. And he joined a few weeks before at the studio I was working at. And I was being trained and underneath him, in the sense of him showing me what we do, and then he would go home, and then I'd go in the studio and start messing about. And that's kind of how I learned. But he was such a good teacher, and he was absolutely amazing as an engineer, and he'd worked with absolutely everybody. Being at Radio Luxembourg, doing the live sessions with all those great musicians and shows that they were doing at that time. So I had a good teacher, and yes, the job became more important than the band, and in the end I happened to be actually quite good at what I was doing. And he left after about 2 years at the studio, and then I was promoted up to his job, and I was still there, which was brilliant. It's the challenges that I actually like, and to be competitive in what we do. You mentioned that I do everything in sound, and that's partly and due to, number one is the studio I was working at was principally a voice-over commercial studio, not doing big music sessions, but doing mostly commercials for the world. And what we were doing, I'd learned kind of how to record voices, and the occasional music act would come in where we'd record, but principally I learned doing that. So when I started working with Python, with Python we did everything, because Python did television, Python did stage shows, Python did cinema, Python made records, and you learn very quickly all the various assets. So it was a good opportunity for me to put my music composing ideas, my sound design ideas, my creative ideas, my funny ideas, all mixed up into one basket. And so Python covered a lot of area, and I was quite unique, I think, in managing to be able to fit into that area. Imagine Dragons, the actual movie wasn't actually planned to do a Dolby Atmos initially. This, as far as I know. I was approached by Jeremy Aziz from Eagle Rock to work on it, and we were going to be doing a 5.1 surround mix originally. And then Dolby came along and heard what they were doing. I'm not kind of sure, did Eagle Rock approach Dolby, or did Dolby approach the Imagine Dragons to do a mix on the concert? So that came in a little bit down the line. But I'd actually started on putting the show together with the principal idea that we were going to be doing a 5.1. We actually started with that idea, and then it developed into something a lot bigger. I think using a music concert in Dolby Atmos is absolutely perfect kind of environment. It works in 5.1, fantastic. But I did a band called Hawk Lords a while back, and we mixed this in 5.1. And basically it was space rock. So we had a great opportunity to actually do a big spread. Now, if we had Dolby Atmos for that, it would be even spectacular. With Imagine Dragons, you kind of take your 5.1 arrangement, basically, and then you put it into your Dolby Atmos environment. And when you're working in Dolby Atmos on a concert, I think it's probably the best medium for me. I think it works really well, because in a live situation, if you went to a concert, you would have the band in front of you, and you'd have the audience all around you. You'd get the hall reverbs, the ambience about all the people's applause and screaming and shouting. But in the environment, the band is always at the front. And that's where I think that works really very, very well. Whereas in a movie, we still are kind of fighting a little bit visually, where we have a helicopter taking off, whizzing over your head and landing in behind you, and you only have to turn your head away 1 minute and you're seeing a side of a wall and no action going on. You're kind of thinking, well, what's going on there? Of course, in sound design environment, we can be actually quite clever, because we can recreate, say, if we wanted to, say, have a scene where we have a room scene like this, but a war zone is going on outside, or an avalanche, or something is going on, we can create that in sound design, and we can do that very, very cheaply. In filming terms, it's going to get hugely expensive. Now, until I think we get vision which kind of works around us, I think it's kind of Dolby Atmos for me. As I said, it works so much better in a concert music environment than in a movie. Although, I've got to say, it sounds spectacular. And I think sound and audio has advanced so much more than pictures have where we are today. Yes, we have virtual reality, but you still have to have this headset on. We have 3D, which is kind of okay, and we have 4D, we have HD, HDX, and I think we're coming up to 5K fairly soon. So we have all this high definition things going, but at the end of the day, we're still looking at something which is on a flat screen in front of us, but the sound is all around us. And as I said, it sounds spectacular, but I think until we really get to have something that really works visually as well as what we actually hear, then I think I'm looking forward to that one day. But I know that Dolby are working on their Dolby Vision process, and that will be kind of interesting to see where we go with that. And there are a few I think some of the theme parks in the world where you have complete surround pictures, and Dolby Atmos will be absolutely perfect for that kind of environment. And as I said, it does sound spectacular, but until we actually get something that we can almost be actual reality as opposed to virtual reality, maybe in 20, 30, 40 years' time we'll be there, or holographic in the middle of your room. That would be pretty fantastic too. That would work well. But as I said, going back to the theory that the music concerts work really well, because in a way, this is how we see a concert. We see the band in front and the audience all around us. And when you're sitting in that environment, that works very, very well. The Imagine Dragons challenges, well, there were several. Number one was that I only had a demo guide track to work with originally of the band recording. The band were on tour when I started working on it. So Scott Eisenberg, who was the front of house engineer, was supplying and editing the tracks for me. So he would be sending over the demo guide mixes, and we kept getting a few updates. But initially, I got all the audience stems because they were just the audience stems and they didn't need any messing about with. So one of the challenges was that I was working with a stereo demo soundtrack, which I bumped up just for monitoring purposes with an upmixer into 5.1. And I then spent majority of my time tidying up the audience tracks. And unfortunately, because where mics were placed to capture the audience, and although they were very rowdy, I was picking up more reverb in the auditorium than the actual audience themselves. So that was a big challenge, to actually get the clarity and cleaning them up so that we didn't get all this rumble and bass rumble, and it was to getting all the highs and lows in the right places. So that was a challenge, yeah. Dolby support was absolutely fantastic. They were absolutely brilliant. When we first went in, I can't praise them enough for their help on this. Number one is for supplying the theatre. We mixed the show in, and Richard Stockdale was our house sound Dolby engineer, and he was just fantastic, and he knew the system inside out. So yeah, we had good help, and he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. We had, would you believe, a total of 4 days, so not a long time, and we didn't get the instrument stems in until we actually were there on the first day. And so I married my audience tracks with my demo upmix guide into the stem mix at Dolby. So then we were married. And then I left Richard, well, I said it's best to leave him alone for a few hours for him to get things sorted and actually know where things are, because it was beginning to be quite a large session. Dolby have another theatre, a demo theatre in Soho, and we listened to it there, and just to compare with what we had, and it worked well. And I must say, Dick Carruthers, who was the director of the film, he really wanted to push the barrier on this one, being his first Dolby Atmos, and we explained to him initially what could be done. So he got quite enthusiastic about what we were going to do with it, and he was brilliant. Yeah, Dick was fantastic to work with. Yeah, and he's very good visually and very good audibly. He had a good sense of what he wanted to do with it. I did a 5.1 version afterwards. There wasn't a 7.1 version, although I do believe that from the Dolby Atmos mix they did a 7.1, but whether they were using that or not, I don't know. But I had to go through and then do a 5.1 version of the Dolby Atmos film separately from the Dolby Atmos mix. Doing up mixes from old mixes, one of the instances I can think of quite early on was about Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Now, when Monty Python and the Holy Grail came out originally, it was only ever out in mono. There was only a mono version existed. So when I was asked to do a 5.1 mix for theatres, because obviously Dolby Atmos wasn't around at that time, I had to go back to the original stems. And luckily, we had one mono dialogue stem, we had one mono music stem, we had one mono sound effect stem. I had 3 tracks. So I had to convert this into 5.1, and that was a total rebuild of everything. I had to then access all the original music, which majority of it was library music, and so I had to access that into stereo. And in those days we had to do a sort of an artificial spread, anything that was in stereo, and certainly in mono. And it was quite early on in the sort of 5.1 days to where we are today. But again, it worked, and I had to relay all the effects in and a bit of new Atmos in 5.1 sound design. So it was a complete rebuild on that. So in a way, the audio was almost like a new version, although I had a basis to work on with the original tracks. So a little bit of a challenge, but it was a great challenge to do. So that was kind of one of my first conversions from mono into stereo. And of course now we have things like up mixers to work with. And they work very, very well in the sense that, in fact, I'm amazed at how well that they do work, these up mixers, and that makes life a lot easier. I think so, to a point where if you leave a film in mono, as it works perfectly well. And we're never taking anything away from that, in the sense that if they prefer the mono version, then go and buy the mono version. It never goes away. There's still a mono version exists. If people have just spent their €1,000, £1,000 of sound equipment for home, then they want to hear surround, then they'll buy the 5.1. We never take away from the mono. And yes, it sounds good as it was, but then sometimes people will say, well, let's see what they've done with this new version, and let's see what happens. So, and we always offer something a little bit more. I think in Holy Grail there's an extra 24 seconds of film that wasn't in the original mono version. So we're kind of, yeah, it suits both worlds. I don't think we're taking anything away. We're just going along with what is available at the time. And whether we'll ever do a Dolby Atmos version of these films, I don't know. We shall see. Insane. They are insane. No, they're actually very, very good, and I enjoy working with them immensely. I mean, I've got to be very grateful that I was in the right place at the right time to actually experience what they've gone through and what I've been through with them. And initially, my first kind of project, because I was working in a commercial studio, voice studio, not so much a music studio initially, I kind of learnt about cataloguing and working things out. And with Python, it's quite disorganized in the sense that who's available at one time to come in to do what certain sketches that we would do. And certainly for the records or the album stuff that we've done, we may get halfway through a sketch and then we jump to another sketch. And you had to keep really good kind of IDs on everything written down to make sure you're organized and where and how to find things very quickly afterwards if you wanted to pick up. And yes, it's quite manic. And people would say, oh, it must have been such a lot of fun working with them. But actually, in reality, it's very hard work trying to keep the organization in there, because you know at the end of the day, if you don't keep a record and an idea of things written down of where things were, you were going to get in a terrible mess. And then obviously it's going to take extra time, and you kind of feel responsible that, hey, you know, I'm doing this, they're looking at me to keep an order on all of this stuff. So you have to be very attentive about what you were doing. So no, I was very conscious about it. Only in so much was that I was more involved in actually recording the Michael Kamen's music for it, in fact, and just how brilliant he was as a composer to do that. And I mean, Terry tends to actually push people to the limit, and I think that is brilliant that he does, and he certainly keeps me on my toes these days. You know, you kind of think when a project comes in and you think, oh God, you know, he normally comes to me when he's got a bit of a problem on a film or something, and then I come in and hopefully can help him out. You know, actually doing a whole project from the beginning, you know, you sort of think, well, where can he go? If I mess up, then what? So I can't afford to mess up. I have to be 150%, even though there's only 100% in a percent. So I have to be that and half more to make sure that I can deliver exactly and remain competitive. There's so many great people out there, and these young people coming up doing what they're doing. You know, I can only do what I can do, and I presume I do it okay because I'm still working. But yeah, it's you have to remain competitive and on top of things that what we do, and see what goes out there. So I think for me, that's what we enjoy doing, is to kind of stay on top of this media work that we do. I think the last two Gilliam films probably I kind of feel that I gave a lot to Terry's last two films. Terry always said to me, he said, "Andre, you're the hardest man to sell." And I go, "Well, why, Terry? Why?" He says, "Well, nobody believes you do everything. Nobody believes you can record voices, you can do dialogue editing, you can do Foley, you record Foley, you can do atmospheres, you do sound effects, you can edit, you can do this quickly, you can do that quickly, you can put all this together, you can do mixing, you can do dubbing." And he said, "Nobody believes me." But considering pretty much Parnassus was where I was at, albeit that I ended up pushing out the dialogues, although I was working on dialogues as well for that. And the same with Zero Theorem, because the amount of work and the turnaround in time to actually do that. But being a sound designer stroke supervisor, I can then watch those things. It kind of proves a point that, yes, one person to a limit can actually do a lot more than what maybe Hollywood thinks. And they probably like to see their 25 credits for sound people on there, for sure. That's the other problem these days, is to actually get a decent budget for sound, because we're at the back end. When we actually get a film in, the special effects are being done, they're spending millions on special effects. The editing has principally been done, although invariably we're working on a film and it's not been locked. And I don't really like working on films that haven't been locked. So they keep chopping and chopping and chopping and moving. And then you think, oh God, I've got like 60 tracks to move and sync up. Oh, that's the other thing, that I tend to do my pre-mixing within Pro Tools as I do my track laying. I don't rely like the old days where you'd have a pre-mix day or a few weeks of pre-mixing prior. I will actually mix as I go along in my track laying. Saves a hell of a lot of time later on, because you're laying in, you're balancing up, and I'm playing back in my room, I'm playing back in 5.1. So I have my dialogue center and I have my atmospheres in surround, and then I can do my panning from footsteps, from my sound effects thing. Oh, you know, if we're in a forest, I can put the atmosphere in surround. I'll do all of that and balance it into the dialogue that we have. So when we go to a dubbing theatre, we kind of zero out the desk. We get all the pan spots right, and then we play the movie, and then we just update the little bits that we actually want to do. Saves weeks and weeks of work. But again, it's because the budgets are so tight now. And as sound designers and sound engineers that we are, we're tending to do a lot more work because there is not enough money to spend all the time and the people involved. And that's kind of where we're at today with today's technology. It's all feasible, and if we had time to do everything, yes, one person can do a whole movie for sure. It's a big, awesome task, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. But again, it's like when I'm recording Foley. I will have a Foley artist. They'll do a few footsteps going across the floor. Okay, let's lay that in, right? I can see a few out. I'll just knock it back in, have a quick scan of that. Okay, let's move on. That saves us having a Foley edit session later on. I work and tidy it up as I go along, so I don't have to worry about it later on, which buys me more time to do the other. So it's a technique of working that we do. My toughest job I think I have done is... My toughest job yet? I think this interview.